This week on QDL, we talked to Tom Taormina, author of It Was Rocket Science, about what it really takes to deliver quality products and services. And here's a hint, it's not about using the right quality tools. We'll talk to Tom when we come back in 30 seconds. Welcome back to Quality Digest Live. QDL is your weekly look at who and what is making news in the world of quality. I'm Dirk Ducharme, Editor-in-Chief of Quality Digest. And today's QDL is brought to you by QMark, manufacturers of styli and accessories for the metrology and machine tool industries. QMark, whose motto is Same Day Styli. If you read Quality Digest, or any quality journal for that matter, most of the topics are about using the right quality tools. Things like control charts, or Six Sigma, or the Toyota production system, or risk-based thinking, or Kaizen, and on and on and on. Name a tool and you've probably read about it in Quality Digest and anywhere else. So the idea is you got a problem, well, you just need to put together the right set of tools, get management buy-in, I don't know, throw in a Kaizen event, and you're all set. Well, our guest today says none of that means anything unless you and your employees have a sense of personal accountability and a set of values, and that's values with a capital V. Tom Taormina was a member of NASA's Mission Control Team when we landed a man on the moon. He was also there for Apollo 13's Houston, We've Got a Problem. And for 50 years since then, he has been a business and quality consultant to more than 700 companies. Tom, thanks for joining us today.
Good afternoon, Derek. Great to be with you.
So, I mean, just so people understand where you're coming from, you were there when those famous words, Houston, we've got a problem, came across from Mission Control, right?
I was a quality control engineer, and my duties during mission, or my crew's duty during missions, was to be on standby in case a piece of equipment failed and had to be repaired and recommissioned for the mission. So basically, I had nothing to do but smoke my pipe and drink coffee. But when those words came over the communications box, things changed that night pretty dramatically. And it was, as I tell people, they said, "Well, you must have been really, you must have been really in the moment." And I said, "No, I didn't really get the grasp of it until a movie came out, because we just did what we were trained to do." And it was the first time I spent a lot of time with the astronauts. They usually kept themselves away from quality guys, but we just got the job done.
Well, and I would say that, and I want to show people your book here, it was rocket science. In fact, it was rocket science, flying the mission of business success. And I would say that, correct me if I'm wrong here, but that experience of we're just doing our job, even in the midst of something that could have been potentially catastrophic, could have lost those astronauts, but in the middle of that, it was just, we're doing what we're trained to do. And I'm thinking that has affected you throughout your life, is that you just train to do what you're supposed to do and you do it right.
Absolutely. And the way I got to NASA was I heard Kennedy when I was in high school say we're going to the moon by the end of the decade. And I said, he's talking to me. So I packed up on my 19th birthday and I drove up to Houston, got a job, put myself through school, and pestered enough people to where I got a job at NASA, and I spent 14 years there. So the reason for going through all of that is the motivation comes from within you, and if you haven't got it, it wouldn't have been a good job for me, because everything we did was with passion and with velocity.
And so let's talk about your book here. So I read your book, and I have to say that the first half of it kind of reads like a recap of the decline of Western civilization.
When I reread it, I say the same thing. I get a little bit cynical in my old age, because I have come across so many people that don't have a passion for excellence and don't have the drive to do things right the first time. So in the book, you see several examples of me plotting a bell curve from 1900 to 2000, and we kind of peaked at around 1950. So what does a quality control guy do? He puts a bell curve on society and the mores, and the fact that we're now back to needing quality control inspectors, and I was hoping that had faded away.
Well, yeah, I was going to say the premise, I'd say throughout your book, joking aside, is that over the decades there's been a decline in some of these are kind of my words, a decline in work ethic, personal accountability, morals, even that has manifested itself amongst many things. But kind of what the point you're getting at is in. This decline in personal accountability and morals and values has manifested itself in the decline in product and service quality as well. And I'm just wondering how you're drawing the connection between the two. I mean, is it possible that's just coincidental, or do you actually see that there's really a connection between the two?
Oh, there's definitely an emotional connection between them. If your heart is not in what you're doing, you're not going to do it correctly. If you're not committed to, at that moment in time when you're putting together a toaster, if you're not putting it together cognitively and making sure that all the connections are secure before you put it in the box, sooner or later you're going to build a bad toaster.
And this comes down to let's say personal accountability. How?
Well, let's give an example. The other part of my life, which I'm doing most of right now, is an expert witness in products liability and organizational negligence. And what I get to see, and I don't really think I became a true quality advocate until I started the expert witness work, because I saw the result of what happens when people don't pay attention to what they're doing, or they don't take accountability. Because inevitably, if that is the case, if there is a acceptable outgoing defect rate for your organization, sooner or later someone's going to use it badly. And I'm working on a case right now where a compressed natural gas hose was not put together, was not crimped correctly. It came off. It started a fire, burned a building down, and hurt a bunch of people. And as I'm going through the case and going through all of the testimony, I'm seeing this serendipitous series of events where this person didn't quite do this correctly, the next person didn't really catch it, the person after that sealed it off and put it in a box, and 2 years later the thing blew up. So the person who was putting that hose together on that day may have just been distracted, may have been putting too many hoses together, but in reading their quality manual and their training, what is missing from it, it's all mechanical. Every bit of the training and the step-by-step of putting that hose together is rote. And the person is not committed to saying, I will never, ever build a hose that can come apart in use. And in reading through all of the transcripts and reading the testimony of the assembler, she was just there to make a living, and she could have been putting together Dixie cups instead of natural gas hoses. So if you're not cognitively into the work and say that I am never going to produce a defective product that I'm making, or a service or software or whatever it is, sooner or later something's going to go wrong.
Well, okay, so it sounds like what you're saying is that this company, this example that you're giving here, they had procedures in place. They had the way to build this product correctly. That was all in place. It wasn't a lack of knowledge, or a lack of how to do it right, or even a lack of written procedures on how to do it right. It was a lack of carrying through on what was already there. Yes,
absolutely. They had more than enough tools. They did Kaizen events. They did Poka-yoke. And when you read the outcome of the Poka-yoke they did in this particular situation. It's like, well, stuff happens. So sooner or later, the crimp didn't go quite right, and shame on you. We won't do that again. That's
Right.
that's somewhat a pokey for.
Well, so this gets us to something that you told me earlier when we talked a few days ago, that you think that in a lot of companies that they have things, and I believe you said that they have things backwards, that instead of a quality policy and, let's say, quality manuals and so on and so forth, that what we need is to have a mission, vision, and values statement. And what do you mean by that? Because I know a lot of companies have mission, vision, and value statements, but they probably couldn't even tell you what they are.
Exactly right. And the book that you have on the desk is the culmination of, it's the 12th book I've written. And what I did was I went back and I said, how did we win the space race? How did we do that? How did 500,000 people working on those, on Gemini and Apollo, work together and get those guys off the ground and to the moon? And the answer lies in, the vision came from John Kennedy, President Kennedy. Now, we're not going to have any more John Kennedys, especially in the workplace, but the person that's in charge of the company needs to have a vision for what it is that his company is going to do. And that needs to be communicated on a daily basis in words and deeds. In other words, whatever he expects out of his people, or she expects out of her people, they have to do it themselves. Then they have to give you a mission plan. Here's the mission plan. Here's how we're going to get from A to B. And then a value set. I call them always and nevers. Every time I do an implementation or a consulting assignment, we do a retreat and we go through these three things: vision, mission, and values. And the value set is always and nevers. If you're going to work here, we always do this. And if you're going to work here, we never do these things. And they're automatic dismissal if you do any of them. And that applies to everybody. That applies to senior management. It applies to the janitor. So that's how we create this environment of self-accountability. And then the value system also says we're accountable to the company and we're accountable for our own work, but we're accountable to each other too. If I'm going to hand a part over to the next step in the assembly, every time I do that, I'm going to say, this is my best work. And if you find something wrong with it, you let me know, because that's my best work. Now, as you said at the opening, we can have all the tools in the world, but if we don't have vision, mission, and values ahead of time, the tools are just mechanical. And you can do a Kaizen event, turns out great, but I've been to several of them that I went back a month later and the thing looked almost like it did before we did the event. They were comfortable in their own little world, and they wanted to go back and get their teddy bear again and hug it.
Well, how do you? I mean, I understand what you're saying. So if these tools are worthless unless you have a value system, then obviously you need a value system. But how do you teach or create an accountability or a value system? I mean, isn't that just a personal thing? I mean, is it really realistic within the workplace to teach, I don't know, something to me which seems more internal?
Back when I was writing for Quality Digest, I think I ended many of my articles. Quality is not a process; it's a state of mind. So, you've brought up the real problem in all of this is that the workplace today is not what it once was. So, for me to implement, we call it quality as a profit center when we talked last week, where these systems do exist. It first of all has to be in an environment that's open, and the people have to be communicative with each other, and they have to have a value system. So, unfortunately, I can see some of your viewers rolling their eyes like, this ain't never going to happen in my place because my boss is he's a tyrant. Well, then he's a tyrant. And if you have to be there, then you have to be there. If you don't, I would look for other opportunities. That's why I've worked for myself for 30 years, because I really don't see other people, other leaders, with the passion in their gut. So, for sake of argument, there's a lot of the companies that are going to be watching this, and they're going to say it will never work in our environment. And if that's the case, then don't try it. However, if the leaders are really interested in excellence and they're open to new ideas, the way you do it is to train everyone in the vision, mission, and values, then create a reward system that's totally different from the current, I call it the direct deposit employee. I mean, they don't even see their paychecks anymore. Here's the model. You have a base salary based on the position you hold. You can only get an increase in base salary by learning a new skill. And then there are other rewards that are individual and group. And the rewards are based on exceeding goals, but to a point where we know what the objective is. Years ago, there was the Nordstrom Way, it was called. I read that book when I first started. And you go into a Nordstrom's, and if they didn't have the shirt you wanted, they'd go down to another store and get it for you and hand it to you and say it's yours. But that was all documented in that book. The Nordstrom Way had the boundaries for what could be done. You couldn't, if you didn't like the shirt, they weren't going to buy you a Cadillac. So the boundaries were defined. And using that model, there's also risk involved. If you didn't meet your goals that you and your team established at the beginning of the time period, monies were taken away from you, or privileges were taken away from you. And so without risk and reward, it'll never work. If you have risk and reward and the person next to you is not pulling their weight, you become a coach and say, look, if you keep this up, we're not going to get our whatever it is we're going to get at the end of the month, at the end of the quarter. So if that's in place, the environment can be created where we learn from each other, we learn the enthusiasm, we learn the personal and group accountability. Now, everything I've said up until now is not easy. It's doggone hard to do, and it's hard to find a CEO that's going to stick his neck out and say we're going to redo our compensation system, because first of all, it is difficult to do financially, but it's also you're going to root out right away a bunch of employees that don't want any part of that. They just want that paycheck every 2 weeks. And I've seen some pretty high-level people leave, and after they're gone, the boss said, "I wonder why they were ever here. He really didn't ever pull his weight."
Right. Well, there was another thing you pointed out in your book that I thought was a little counterintuitive. Is you said encourage entrepreneurship. Now, when I think of entrepreneurship, I think of somebody kind of, a lone wolf striking out on their own. I've got this idea, I'm going to pursue it. That seems almost the antithesis of working in a team environment where everybody's pulling for the same thing. So is my definition of entrepreneurship wrong?
No, of course not. It's entrepreneurship is different for everyone. I do work with the Entrepreneurship Center here, and that's the classic. Someone they've got an idea, and they got some money, and they're going to start a company. And actually, it's a perfect example because they never think about vision, mission, values until things start going wrong. And they think the typical entrepreneur that I deal with thinks they can do it all themselves. Let's take another good example, Dell Computer. When I was working with Dell as a consultant, there were 4 people in the executive suite. They called it the office of. It wasn't they didn't have a title on the door. And when the door closed, there was Michael Dell, who was the enlightened leader, the visionary, and the businessman. There was a financial expert, materials expert, and engineering expert. When the door closed, there were no titles, and they didn't open that door again until they'd reached consensus on what they were going to do, and they would all pull together and make sure that it happened, as opposed to what we do in politics is we compromise, and nobody gets what they want. So looking at the four of them as entrepreneurs is exactly what I'm trying to transfer to other people with the term entrepreneur. Your gut's in it. You got the fire in your belly. You know what the job is, and you've got people surrounding you that are there to support you, and you're there to support them. So the entrepreneurial definition I'm using is more of a mentor, more of one who leads by example. So in this case, entrepreneur equals fire in the belly.
Okay. I don't want to go before we talk about something that it made me laugh, because again, there's a lot of things in your book that catch me off guard, but so have some of our conversations. You and I were talking the other day, and you mentioned you mentioned the hand grenade of risk-based thinking. Now, risk-based thinking is something we've been talking a lot about in articles and on the show for the last 4 or 5 years, particularly because it really came to the fore in ISO 9001 2015. So, but you call it the hand grenade of risk-based thinking, which sounds like this big negative thing. What are you saying? I mean, obviously you're not saying that risk-based thinking is bad, I don't think. So what is the hand grenade of risk-based thinking?
To set it up a little bit, I chaired the Quality Management Systems Committee of ASQ. So I was kind of in the bowels of things for a number of years. My committee was tasked with one of our tasks was defining quality management. And I came up with a sentence and gave it to the rest of the committee, and we wound up with 13 white papers. That's the way things are traditionally done in the inner circles of quality. And of course, we had some dealings with TC 176 at the time, and the bureaucracy was just so, they were there for the process, not for the outcome. And
TC 176 was the tag for the technical advisory group for ISO 9001, right?
Correct. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, they still are. They're still at it.
Yeah.
So when I saw one of the first drafts of the 2015 revision and saw risk-based thinking, I said, here we go again. Every time they make a change to the standard, there's thousands and thousands of people that are going to do the transition implementation or audits or whatever. What does risk-based thinking mean to any given person? You can go and look online and find about 10 different definitions of risk. You have the traditional risk because of insurance kind of risk. You have risk because of hazards. And then you have the business risk, which is what we're talking about, is risk-based thinking. What does that mean? And I just see the TC 176 committee sitting there with a hand grenade, throwing it over the wall, saying, "Let's see what they'll do with this."
Right. So what you're saying is that the concept of looking for risk and understanding risk, good concept, but without a definition, or people don't know what to do with it. It's just kind of a term.
Exactly. It means something. It means something different to anyone that you discuss it with. And we had our ASQ section meeting last week, and I did a presentation on this topic. And out of the 15 or so people that were there, none of us actually agreed on what risk meant in the parlance of quality. Mm-hmm. So it just, to me, it obfuscates the work we have to do, because it's not a clearly defined process.
Okay, and I will say that Quality Digest does a lot of webinars with various, particularly when ISO when the 2015 version was coming around. And I will say that is probably the biggest question we always got, is people trying to understand what risk-based thinking was, and does it involve this or does it involve that, and do I got to watch out for this or that or the other. So I agree that that was a very confusing concept for people. I think they understood it on a conceptual level. Yeah, risk is important. We got to understand what our risks are, but not having it nailed down, they're worried about an auditor coming in and them getting dinged because somehow or another they haven't taken some aspect of risk into account.
Exactly. And I've been, fortunately, I've been in audit teams and representing clients with external auditors since 1989, and I've seen it all. I think maybe not everything, but I've seen, especially the external auditors, attempting to interpret some nuance of the standard, and I'm sitting there shaking my head. Where did that come from? Where did you had an experience somewhere that said that that's not acceptable, or the procedure wasn't written correctly.
Right.
So what do they do with risk-based thinking? How do you audit it? I'd love to be a fly on the wall and see how somebody audits risk-based thinking. Now, again, let's put it in perspective. My 11th book is called Foreseeable Risk. As a expert witness, I was commissioned to write that book by Lawyers and Judges Publishing, because basically when I do an expert witness assignment, I'm doing quality process audits. I'm determining if the company that made the product or provided the service did or did not exhibit an acceptable standard of care before they introduce it into the workplace or into the stream of commerce. So I have a really keen sense for what risk is. When you've seen pictures of burned down houses and dead bodies, I know what risk means. I wish everyone who is a quality professional could sit through a case with me and go through. The first thing that you look at is, how could that possibly have happened?
Right.
It just shouldn't happen, but it does. So I have a very keen sense of what risk is, and I wish I could share that with everybody. But it's a very personal thing too, yeah. And it's also what is it your company wants. As we talked about last week when we were just getting set up, too many of the assignments I've had as consultant in the last 10 years have been rescue operations, companies that were either dead or dying.
Yeah.
And the label I put on it was they were perfecting mediocrity.
Right. So let me let you have the kind of the last word to give to companies in the last minute or so that we have here. So what would be, if there's one concept that you could leave with companies, kind of Taormina's last word. What would be the one concept you could leave with companies that would help them view the delivery of their products and services and everything that leads up to a quality product or service, that would help them to pursue that in the right way?
Have the senior team, people that the top management that trusts each other and communicates with each other, go off-site for a weekend and start from scratch with vision, mission, and values. What is our vision for this company? Where are we going? Are we going to grow it, sunset it? Are we going to sell it? Let's get all of that on the table. Then what is our mission? How are we going about it? And then establishing a set of values. And that'll take an entire weekend if it's done correctly. And then you fundamentally go back and re-engineer the quality management system, if that's what you want to call it. I call it a business management system. But you start looking at all the process procedures differently. Looking at them not as a quality control person, but looking at them as, how can we make this process stupid proof? Right. Not even error proof, stupid proof.
All right. Well, Tom Taormina, author of It Was Rocket Science, Flying the Mission of Business Success. Thanks so much for joining us. That was fun. Glad I could talk to you for hours. You're a fount of interesting stories and information.
Well, thanks, Dirk. It's been a pleasure working with you in the past, and look forward to it in the future.
All right. Terrific. Thanks, Tom. And now it's time for today's Tech Corner, brought to you by QMark, manufacturers of styli and accessories for the metrology and machine tool industries. QMark, whose motto is same-day styli. And what we're going to look at today is a web application that QMark designed to help error-proof and speed up the CMM-probe styli ordering process. So we're going to start from their website. We're going to do design your own probe, then start your design. And the first thing we're going to do is select a thread size. So we'll just select M4 here, and this will bring up their design page. And what you'll see on their design page is a 3D representation of a probe. And it should be pretty obvious what's going to happen next. We're simply going to fill in the various dimensions for a probe. And as we do this, you'll see the probe change on the screen. So, and also as you mouse over these dimensions, notice that it tells you what that dimension represents off to the left-hand side. So the first one, the L1, end of the ball to the thread shoulder. That means from here to here. So if I change this to 50, you can see that immediately grew the entire length of the probe. The next one is from the tip of the ball to the beginning of the base. We'll call that one 40. So now see our base shrunk back up, and the overall length is still the same, 50 millimeters. We're going to change the diameter of the ball itself. So we're going to change that from 5 to 3. And now we want to put a couple steps into the stem. So the first step, the first dimension, the L3 dimension, is going to be from the tip of the ball to the first step. And we're going to call that 30 millimeters. And we'll make that stem diameter 2 millimeters. So you can see we went 30 millimeters from the tip of the ball, and then we made that a 2 millimeter diameter stem. Let's add another step. Let's make this 20 millimeters from the tip of the ball and make it a 1 millimeter diameter stem. So you can see now we've designed our probe. We've got the overall length. We've got the length from the tip to the base. We've got 2 steps in there, and we've stepped it down from 3 millimeters to 2 millimeters to 1 millimeter. And we can see what we've got in front of us. So we have confidence when we go to order this that we're actually getting what we expect to get. We know what we've ordered. There's no confusion about what dimensions mean. And of course, the last step would be to select your ball material. So we'll leave that as ruby, let's say. We'll make our body material, let's say titanium. Let's make our stem material, I don't know, graphite. And now we've selected our materials, we submit our design, our order form comes up, we fill in our order form, we click Send Design, and that is going to send this design obviously to QMark, to their salespeople. It's also going to send an email to us with the dimensions and everything that we ordered so that we have confirmation of our order. The QMark salespeople will get back to you with a quote, and if you order, that probe will be shipped the same day. So if you're interested in this, you just go to cmms.com or cmms.com, and then you click on the Design Your Own Probe, and then Start Your Design, and that will take you through everything that I just showed you. Also, be sure to subscribe to their YouTube channel. There's a lot of useful videos out there that you don't want to miss, so be sure to subscribe to that. Again, that's QMark, same-day styli, 100% guaranteed, and QMark is an ISO 9001 registered company, so check them out. So that's all that we have time for today, and as usual, if there is someone or something you would like to see on the show, or some topic you would like us to cover, send those ideas to us at qdl@qualitydigest.com, and we will try to cover those topics on the show. Thanks for joining us today, and we will see you next week on QDL. So long.